This is the
This is the third.
third meeting of the sea level rise task force. And why don't we go around and say our names for the video there?
Tish Gallagher.
Gail Sites.
Alice Reel.
Rick Dennell.
Tim Moore, Google Park Company.
Mike Marinelli and Tommy Wilson will not be here. They are part of the task force as well. The first thing on the agenda is the review of the minutes of last meeting. We just got the minutes. If everybody is agreed to it, I say we review them before the next meeting and we approve or disapprove of them at the next meeting. Is that, everybody agree with that?
That's fine.
Okay.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there are. It's very technical too. So anyway, so at the last meeting, Tim suggested toward the end that we should probably prioritize how we're going to approach this, because we have a lot to do, and a year doesn't seem like a lot of time to do it in. I'm sure, you know, people have been engrossed in this for their careers, and it's a really steep learning curve for everybody, I think. But so as part of that, Gail sent around something that I think is really good, which is a list of the priorities that she believes, well, you have that probably, that she believes that we should be following. And I did a very preliminary thing too, which was more like, what should we approach first? Gail's was more that went along with our vulnerability assessment in section 6, which is really good. But I thought, you know, maybe we should approach it with, well, I'll hand these out too. So Gail, you want to take a look at, give us a rundown of what you said?
Sure. And this is my draft thoughts. I did base it on the recommended actions or activities in the vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And I didn't know about this study that had been done, but it's great. I mean, there's so much information in here, and took it.
Very helpful.
It is. You know, a lot
This is
further
the
than.
assessment of dike alternatives and structured floodproofing measures that you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of great information in there. And so also trying to tie it to that. So my priorities at a high level, my number 1 is create a concept plan, including engineering for the gap between Broad Dike and Gamba Corda Dike, which is goal 6.4.1 in the adaptation plan, which would cover the strand from Plum Alley to Delaware Street, Battery Park, Delaware Street. And to begin with, the analysis and alternatives that are on pages 30 through 36, where this was looked at. And there's a lot of alternatives in there, and a lot of data to begin with. Then number 2, evaluate alternatives of raising the dikes to 9 feet, 10.5 feet, 13.5 feet, and again, goal 6.4.1, and begin with the analysis and planning level cost estimates that are in here. And then also determine other studies data needed. And number 3, modeling studies needed to accomplish 1 and 2 above, which is goal 6.2.1. There are studies going on right now, assessing basements and elevation levels, etc. So those are being done now, and evaluate if there are any others needed before we would proceed. Number 4, update emergency operations plan and include areas to park cars. That's goal 6.1.1. Get a copy of the current emergency operations plan. And is there an existing, this is a question, is there an existing committee that deals with the operation?
The emergency operations plan is usually just a small committee made up of the chief of police, the city administrator, a representative from Goodwill Fire Company. Usually, it's the chief and myself. And at the time, there was one other person, the president of council served on it. So.
Does it meet
we-
regularly or?
No,
just-
so we know that the chief and I and the city administrator just spoke the other day about it. So once we get through separation day and some of these other big things that are happening, we're gonna dive into that. So
Okay.
it's pretty in depth. So it'll take a little while to go through, because there's some additions, some changes that we need to make just with staff and that kind of stuff.
The Board of Health just was looking at this as well. There are some parallels between the Board of Health and their concern with emergency operations and what happens in
Yeah.
Newcastle.
We learned
And-
that the last couple of years, I guess, didn't we?
Mhm.
We learned that with the last
Yeah.
couple of years.
Yeah, and we asked about this plan and we actually had a meeting with city council and some of the people from the plan on the county level. And there should be a video of that meeting, and there's certainly minutes of it too that are available for you to look at as well. But I think hearing about it firsthand is really useful.
Right. What, can we get copies of the plan and maybe you could give us an
Yeah,
overview?
I do have a copy of it. I think something like that would be better coming from the city administrator.
Okay.
That way, since it falls under like his umbrella, so to speak,
Okay.
and all, but it's not technically current with the names that are in there.
All right, so what? Oh, so that was for 5 develop near and long-term funding strategies for the above priorities, which is goal 6.2.1, research funding resources and determine needs, timing, grant writers. Number 6, community engagement, goal 6.1.2, community outreach of existing studies results, like some of the work that's been done, as well as concept level plans. Once we get to that point, and also identify and provide on the web and or events homeowner approaches to flood proofing. And again, there's information here that we could draw from. Number 7, planning and regulatory. Planning is goal 6.1.1, regulatory 6.1.3. Have city budget for AECom along with planning commission to review city code zoning and comp plan to make recommendations for adjustments to include flooding and sea level rise. And I know we have things in our code and our comp plan, but based on some of the studies and the projected sea level rise, it should all be reviewed. 8, transition sea level rise task force to standing committee, goal 6.1.2. I assume that'll happen at the end. And number 9, have city staff become knowledgeable about resiliency and flood proofing, goal 6.1.2. Tish and I both attended the creating a flood ready community a couple weeks ago, and I thought that was excellent training. And there were a lot of, a number of clerks, city clerks throughout Delaware. There were a lot of downstate people represented. It was a very, very good course.
City clerks are there.
Uh-huh.
What, because of the regulatory stuff necessary?
And
Just answering questions, having some background.
Right. Yeah, it was a very good course. I would recommend it.
Yeah.
I assume they'll offer it again, but it might not be for another
Is
year.
Is it possible to get materials? Would materials actually help anybody? who
So
wasn't able to
we
afford it?
have the PowerPoint.
I thought I sent you the PowerPoints.
No, I didn't actually get the PowerPoint. You sent me a link for the presentation on the Tuesday, which I wasn't able to see because I was gone Tuesday. But I didn't, that was before you said you were going to get the PowerPoint. I didn't actually,
We
I
did.
don't
have
think
it.
I got it, but then I get,
Okay.
300 emails a day, so it's
I'll
possible.
check,
Okay,
because I thought I
I
sent.
mean,
it to you.
they also gave a sheet resources to help your community be flood ready. And there are funding resources.
Yeah, that would be
That
great to
piece
have
of
that.
paper is
Yeah.
really
So,
good.
could you either send that to me and I'll send it to everybody or send it to
Sure.
everybody? Thank you.
So I mean, I'm on this. And appoint staff as specialists, work with State Coastal Program and University of Delaware. So anyway,
Gail, do you think some of these can be worked on simultaneously? And is that, do we have FOIA considerations with that?
Oh, you mean by?
But
the
like
task force?
subcommittees,
Ah. Yeah, probably. I mean, somebody probably has to look into the funding part of it at least, without, because a lot of this has to do with studying and researching and things like that, like studying and researching funding sources. Can't be done at a meeting, obviously. So, but maybe 2 or 3 people can do it together, because after that, it's a quorum, which has to be public. But anyway, before we get into that, I wanted to just see this. I think this is saying the same thing Gail is, but without the specificity, because what I was thinking is that we would first of all concentrate on preventative, which means basically taking care of the dikes and the gap between the dikes and looking at the various ways that could be, the gap itself we could just raise to the current 8.5 feet, I guess, but doesn't seem like it's really worth it. But anyway, or to 9 feet, 10.5 feet, or 13.5 feet. 9 feet being the current level, which would be, with the FEMA maps right now, and 10.5, 2050, and 2100 would be 13.5. And we prepare updated costs for these plans and see what can be done to prevent flooding from land and the dikes, which is what I was talking about earlier, David, that that so much flooding is internal, like around Route 9. And I know that's a state road, so I don't know how much, we can do something with that. Or I keep thinking about Mike saying his house on Van Dyke Village gets almost flooded up to his back, steps. And I'm just, wow, it's amazing so far inland to have that kind of problem. But anyway, so that would be the first part, preventative. Then would be reactive, prepare a plan of action for the possibility of flooding, for instance, evacuation routes, warning systems, etc. And then communications, let new Castilians know what they can do to prevent damage to their properties and or the possibility of flooding, and what to do if it comes. So that's sort of my 3-tiered thing. Gentlemen, do you have anything to add to that? I know, Tim, it was your suggestion that we prioritize.
Yeah, I didn't break it down just specific. So basically what I did is I took all of the 6.0 and how it's broken down into 6.1, 0.2, 6.1.2 and 6.1.4. I broke it down into keeping it as the whole number, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. So what I end up doing is my the number one priority for me is 6.2, which is the information gathering. Being able to, and we may have enough, we may need a little bit more with it, which is updated, because a lot of this work has already been done, previous committees.
Right.
And all, so maybe just seeing if the information needs any update and if it has changed at all over the years. My number 2 was 6.3 with the actions, activities, the model, and having a plan. That way you're able to present it. My number 3 was 6.1, which comes into the planning, the community engagement, regulations, that type of stuff. So being able to have that information and then taking that information and having it ready for the community, for the community engagement, getting them to understand the reasoning, what our thought process is, making sure that we meet like the regulations, that we don't have to have anything amended or anything like that, which goes along with the planning. And then my last priority of it was 6.4, which is the long-term aspect of it.
Fish, you had some thoughts about that, about the priorities?
I looked at it in a totally different way. My background's in public health and public health nursing, and we have a a framework that we use called the prevention framework. And it's basically you look at primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. You don't have to do them in order. They can be done simultaneously, but primary is basically education. So that's educating ourselves and also when we know enough the community in public health terms, it's education and it's immunization. It's preventing something before it ever happens. So in some ways that ship has kind of sailed, but you still got things that you can talk about, like, what can you do with your house to make it more flood proof or whatever. Secondary is catching something early. So it's, you have a heart attack, critical care. It's what can we do now to make sure that we don't have a horrendous thing like they had in New York and New Jersey with Sandy 10 years from now. Let's get on it now to prevent that.
So that would be looking more at sort of the 13.5 rather than getting up to 9 feet. Would that?
It would probably be at
corollary?
least looking at 10.5. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And then tertiary is stuff has gone bad, but how do we deal with what we're stuck with?
Right.
If we do nothing now.
Yeah.
So just a different kind of framework to look at it. But trying to fit these things into that may be a little awkward.
How about you, Rick? Do you have any thoughts on this? Priorities?
Well, I was considering the parameters, whether to build to a worse or a medium expectation over a span of 25 years. And using like 10 foot as the mean high water level for a storm or hurricane. Also, the local thunderstorms and rain, we probably should clean out the ditches like they're at ferry cutoff. But again, that's probably more of a DelDOT responsibility. My thought was that we also need to designate the land for flood protection and dike construction that kind of connect the gap. I was talking about thinking about a concept or a design plan for at least a 10-foot earthen barrier, a berm. And as Gail mentioned, we need to start campaigning for funding, whether it be county, state, or federal, because there's going to be a contest for these funds, not only here in Delaware, but up and down the entire East
Right.
Coast. I think part of the priority that we need to look at is to acquire assessments for the areas between the dikes.
Assessments for the property that would have to be used for the berm?
Right.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. And then, of course, can come up with a construction estimate of what that berm would be.
Right.
And there were several great examples of, although probably a little old now, but in the assessment for
Yeah.
dikes.
Right.
And I was thinking instead of a time span of whether it be 10 years or 25 years or 50 years, that we start looking at what's doable. That would be the 25-year range. And of course, updating building code. So that's probably an ongoing process. I don't know that we need to address that. But again, educate the community, if nothing else, to get a campaign started for funding.
Right. I think that's right. And it's, the city right now has money from the federal government that hasn't decided what to do with yet. So might be a time to look at that right now. But when I was thinking about the priorities, I went back to our resolution establishing our committee. And it has specific things that we have to do, which sort of goes along with what we've been talking about. The goals of this task force shall be to review available information on the impact of sea level rise on the city of Newcastle and possible actions for its remediation. To prepare a prioritized list of actions the task force recommends the city take for the remediation of sea level rise. Obtain and submit cost estimates for each of these recommended actions. Identify potential funding sources. And then prepare a list of resources for property owners who should take action to protect their property beyond which the city may, that which the city may undertake. So it's pretty specific that we have to, I think, address the dikes and the berm and everything first, unless somebody else has any other. I think that's got to be, just because of what it says here, you have to remediate that. So anyway. So I appreciate everybody's really thoughtful answers to that question of priorities, and have to think about it, I guess. But anyway, Mr. Athy is here to talk a little bit more about the dike. And you said you had a model of the dike, is that right? Or you said last time you had something that was the
Yeah,
possibility?
this is before I distributed the report, that I would like bring it on blow the exhibits up on an easel or something like that. Well, once I distributed the report, I wasn't sure that was really needed to, all I had was like a snapshot and you blow it up and the pixels. So,
Okay.
sorry, I did not bring anything.
Okay, that's fine. But maybe we can talk about this then.
Okay,
Because this was a real revelation, I think, because I thought we were starting from square one here, and it turns out it's all been done before, and a couple of years ago. But maybe it wasn't done. It seems to have been done by walking around and taking a look, rather than maybe, I don't know, for instance, observing, indicating whether or not a berm would be a problem with coastal environmental problems and things like that. I gather that didn't actually enter into this at all. Correct? Is that right? Tell
pretty
me.
much.
Yeah. But is there anything in this that you think is out of date or is not?
No, not necessarily. It's not necessarily an out of date thing, but I'd like to stress a couple times, it was just a lack of data, particularly the flood proofing options, which is the
Right.
more or less the sole purpose, the major purpose that we got the FEMA grant. And as we speak, other contractors are getting those floor elevations, looking at basement, things of that nature. So I would say it was still, and I think I used this, I'm going to probably keep it, we started the vulnerability assessment was way up here. The flood proofing assessment kind of got down here. We're really trying to get much lower and actually have the data from several hundred structures to really determine what's the better, I don't say make it totally a binary conversation, but in a way it is, raise the dikes and close the gaps between the dikes, or don't, and just accept the fact that there's going to be water in the city periodically, as harsh as that may sound. But there are ways to deal with it. And I think a lot of it, depending on when you start talking about getting funding as well, and Rick was absolutely correct. That you probably heard I was at the workshop that Galen Fisher had as well. Already people jockeying for positions, because the state certainly isn't going to have unlimited resources here either. But certainly if you get federal dollars involved, this cost benefit analysis will become majorly key. In other words, they're not going to give you $10 million to protect $5 million of property behind it. You always have to have that ratio greater than 1.0. So again, this would give the data to really make that determination a lot more accurate, a lot better.
So we'll be able, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So we'll be able to do a cost benefit analysis after we get the data from the current studies going
Well,
on?
you can get a heck of a lot closer. The other thing that's totally out of any of our controls here is, we all know, the whole state of Delaware is undergoing a property assessment. And it's been, what, 1983, I think, since Newcastle County. I mean, the properties are ridiculously undervalued. So that was something else. I think we just used $100 or whatever the sum was.
It was really low. And, and it was like 23 million or something like that, 20 million of which was one property.
I didn't understand those numbers.
All right, well, we can revisit that one.
Right.
But that was yet another piece of information, and again, here it is, per square foot, $100 a square foot. It's on page 5, oh, I'm sorry, that's the executive summary.
Well,
Last
that's where I was first reading this and I didn't understand on page 5.
Okay. I'm sorry, please.
Well, it seemed to say that there aren't a lot of, well, at least according to the study, that there aren't a lot of structures in the current floodplain where you could do flood proofing.
30 some, 32, 37, something like that.
And
Yes,
I mean,
that is what this said, caveat, based on a fairly limited amount of information. Now we can go much farther down into the weeds on that.
Once we
Maybe
do
now's
these
a
studies.
good time,
right,
which is hence okay, but let's go back to the property value thing. We used $100 a square foot. But through the cost benefit, and let's use raising of the dikes, because that could be a multi-million-dollar huge capital investment one way or the other. So let's assume federal dollars are involved. They will, pretty much every source I know of would mandate a cost benefit greater than 1.0. And the higher that ratio, the more likely you're going to get funded. In other words, a project that has a 10-to-1 ratio, probably is going to get funded over one that has a 2-to-1 ratio.
Well, Dave, will this study be able to, will the information gathered in this study be able to show if we wanted to raise the dikes as the first level of defense, so to speak, right? What level they should be raised at, to what level they should be raised at, and second to that, how long would that last us? Would it last the city 5 years before it would have to be raised again?
Right.
Like what all will this information be able to tell us that's gathered?
Okay, the information that is currently being gathered.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure I understood that. So answer to your first question is, I believe there would be 2 components to how high you'd want to raise those dikes. One, the information will help solve that question of how much are you protecting the properties behind it? And that would go to those floor elevations. In other words, if you have, just super simplistically, let's say every house, this isn't true, but every house had an elevation, a first floor elevation of 10. Well, raise it like to 10 and a half, you just saved every one of them. If they all have an elevation of, or like half of them have an elevation at 11, you only save half of them. So that part of it, if here's the dike on the one side, we would get the information. The other side, I can't answer your question. That is total, how high is the city going to get and how quickly?
I just didn't know if it tied in with like 100-year flood or whatever, 50-year flood, whatever. I just wasn't sure if there were some scientific calculations that kind of ties in. So that way, when we go after funding, we're able to answer questions more specifically and more directly from the research gathered. This is what we see, this is going to last us whatever. So that way, it's not like a whole bunch of funding all at one time. It's spaced out by saying, oh, okay, hey, they're on to something. They're catching it here, knowing it's going to, eventually they're going to have to get to here.
Yep. So I would not use necessarily the word calculation. That implies a very high level of accuracy. I would use the word projection. And what we did in the vulnerability assessment is set the groundwork for everything is we took the FEMA mapped floodplain, which I think is a pretty, defendable source of data.
Yeah, it's there.
And we literally just added the 2 feet and the 5 feet. So if the elevation's 8.5, we added, that's how we got the 10.5 and the 13.5. by those years 2050 and 2100, which again are the DENREC projections. I guess that was the other document I went ahead and gave you all, even though I'll be honest, I had a little bit of a tough time following it. I also bought
I didn't get
that companion
I
document, which probably I need cop or
You mean
something like that.
Are you talking about this one, the geological? survey?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I also bought this thing by Robert Kopp, which is referenced multiple times, and this was really tough to get through, but anyway. If you trust the PhDs and such who work at the Delaware Geological Survey, they put their stock in these projections. But of course, the farther out you go, the wider that range goes. Again, none of us have crystal ball. By the way, Kevin, chime in anytime you feel.
You're doing a great
Answer anytime you want to add something or disagree with.
so
me,
are you
please.
saying that, let's say that this survey you're doing shows that a lot of houses would not be damaged as much as they look like they would be now because they'd be able to be, say, wet, flood-proofed or something.
Okay.
We could actually have less of a reason to raise the dikes.
Yes, excellent point, actually. And this where we'll have to go back into the weeds of what floodproofing means. We did not have the data, and here we need to differentiate between the wet and the dry. As the name implies, the dry floodproofing are gates, impermeable layers, things like that literally keep the structure dry. Wet floodproofing are the vents, breakaway, whatever, that allow the water to come in and then allow the water to leave. But it's a great point, and this is where maybe it isn't that fork in the road necessarily. Maybe there are hybrid approaches that instead of trying to raise the dike to 13 and a half and all the enormous issues that causes, maybe you compromise and go to like 12 or something, because there are enough homes behind it that have a floor elevation above it, or it could be wet flood proof or dry flood proof. Although, as Gail noted, those were kind of few and far between per the current regulations. But as I kind of theorized a little bit, and actually I spoke to Dave Warga at that event a couple of weeks ago, and he kind of agreed there are things in the works, but FEMA's moving really slowly, is the regulations. There are some, like the NRDC, Natural Resource, the really aggressive nonprofits are really on FEMA's case to be updating their regulations to allow more flexibility in the face of climate change, what's happening, because you will note, Gail, the reason we whittled that down to such a few numbers is to hit the current regs. The city has this freeboard requirement. I think FEMA will only allow you to dry flood proof up to 3 feet, a 3 feet height without specially designed this and that. And so it was, we kind of get boxed in a little bit on lack of flexibility. Am I confusing you too much, or?
So they could raise it higher, you think, and then it would be, more people could be flagged. It's not easy to say, dry flood proofed.
So the way the regs are now,
Regulations.
is, and again, it was just a study. We had to pick some number. FEMA, I believe you can dry flood proof up to an elevation of 3 feet high, because you think about 3 feet of water, that's an enormous hydrostatic pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, so it makes sense.
Right.
So we'll allow you to go to 3 feet high, but then after that, you need like specially, structural engineer sign and sealed, really complicated provisions, which frankly would be really tough to do on historic structures, but we'll put that one aside for the time being. And then the reason we backed into so few numbers is the city also has this freeboard requirement that you need to be flood, you have to have that additional freeboard above the flood elevation, which is 18 inches. You subtract 18 inches from 3 feet, now you'd add 18 inches. So anytime the flood waters were greater than that elevation, that's kind of what threw so many structures out of our desktop analysis. So I kind of put this in the email. I forget if Tim forwarded my email to you all or just forwarded the reports. But I know I said the real value, I believe, in that flood proofing stuff is really more so the dikes.
That's what I thought.
Because
too,
I don't want to call it misleading, but let's just say it was our first bite at the apple with very little data. And if I had the opportunity to redo it, I think I probably would have changed my approach a little bit. But 3 or 4 years ago, we did what we thought was appropriate. But now it's kind of gotten us off on a slightly different direction, that now that we are going to get this additional data, I definitely want that second bite of the apple.
Can I ask, I'm sorry, how the pricing was arrived at? Pricing?
For the
For
flood
anything,
proofing?
yeah, for the, no, for the dike elevation.
Basic, I mean, these weren't like, you get a contractor in and, umpteen line items or whatever. I mean, this is, we have a structural engineering group or geotech that does a lot of this work. And I mean, they looked at the materials, quantities, things of that nature, and developed an estimate. I mean, I'm not gonna call it the most detailed estimate ever made, but
Okay.
So we could potentially take these numbers, consider changes in the economic situation
inflation.
and
absolutely.
percentages and increase them, look at them that way, rather than, again, starting from square one.
Yeah, I think for maybe this kind of goes to Tim's question a little bit. If you're already starting to kind of try to build your case for applying for different funds, I think the second part of this, the dikes and the areas between the dikes are enough to give a funding agency that this isn't just a wild thought. This is at least thought through well enough.
And I think that that's what they would rather see.
Yes.
Because you already have an existing structure in place.
Right.
That I don't want to say has met its life expectancy,
You're talking about the dikes.
but,
Yeah.
right, but needs to be updated.
Mhm.
Just because of things change, Mother Nature change, she changes constantly. I mean, just look at yesterday, schools were let out because of a big storm, and it was a beautiful afternoon.
Wasn't it
You know what I mean? Maybe not so much in Cambridge, Maryland, but, for here, that, and so I think when you have an existing structure already in place that, with how climate change is and all that you want to repair, I think that goes a long way versus starting scratch,
Absolutely.
because something's already in place. So they know it works. It's just outdated and
Right.
it's not working efficiently.
So it seems like the whole time we've been talking about the gap and then the dikes, and you have to do them together. So one thing that hit me when we did the tour with Jeff of the dikes, I had this vision that one dike just ran into another dike, and that's not how it is. So the broad dike only goes to the tree line, and then the land is high enough there that we don't need a dike there. And then
And the same thing near
Buttonwood,
Dobbinsville, there's the Damacorta Marsh dike, and then there's some higher ground, and then the
right,
Army Creek dike.
right. So, but then we have, so there, and then in Buttonwood, it's a fairly short dike because there's high land on both sides.
On either end.
On either end. But we have this gap in the historic district where it's low. There's
I think
nothing,
it's gotta be one of the main priorities.
right?
is
There's
addressing that one.
nothing, and so we've been talking about that we have to do both, and I know we have to consider both, but could we address the gap and, do a berm or whatever we decide? And then, does it have to be, if it was, let's say we decided it was 10 feet or whatever, would that be a problem to the dikes if we didn't have the funding yet to raise them above 8.5 feet? I mean,
Well,
can we separate them rather than trying to apply for millions of dollars to do both the gap and the dikes?
So the trouble
Is-
is,
why don't you
Is your
field that one?
question, I think your question is, Gail, if you only had enough money to raise 3 of the 5 dikes, would that be okay? Plus fill in the gap? Huh?
Right.
And the answer is sure.
Okay.
I think
You know, you just have to decide through analysis, how many properties are gonna be flooded if we don't do dike X versus we do dike Y.
Right.
I think you gotta, that's all part of this kind of moving target complex analysis that David is describing, where you're looking at flood elevations at homes, you're looking at dike elevate, you're gonna have to see, there's gonna be some balance between, all right, we should focus our efforts and funding on this and a little bit here, and we'll get the guys are grinding on. And it's not gonna happen overnight, but I think, that's your goal. And that as well as, okay, how do we fill in this, crucial area between Broad Dyke and Gamba Quarter,
Right.
and
Can I ask a technical question though? If we raise it to 10.5, is the ground between the dikes high enough? Is it 10.5?
in some areas, maybe, but that's part of the engineering analysis that has to
Right.
get done before you can do a design.
You mean because it might already be 2 feet above sea level, so it only needs.
No, what I mean is, let's say you got the dike right here and the too high ground, right? But the high ground is only 9 feet. Or, 9.5.
Then if you want, if
Then you have
10
to
is your
extend the
goal, you
dike
gotta,
all the way
you
over
gotta raise that, like that's what happened in Broadmoor. That there's, there was the dike at 8.5, we put in that little gentle hill within the park, and then it ties into, that high ground at the end of the strand there. And,
Right.
that's what you gotta do, you gotta have that place to tie in to provide the security that a 10-foot dike gives you, otherwise the water just goes around it.
Which is, I think, maybe I misled you a little bit last meeting, because when I kind of said it's pointless to do one without doing the other, what I really meant was all you would be doing is transferring your problem
Right.
to whatever the new, but, and we're bringing up excellent points here. We haven't really talked about a sequencing and being realistic about money and its availability. You may have to do something, the strand at elevation 10.5, and then 10 years later, raise the dikes accordingly. Or maybe you then raise them to 12.5, and then 20 years after that, you raise, you might have to just.
Or maybe you go with a cheaper option for the dikes.
Well, that's
And
what I
that-
was wondering.
Or-
And that was the thing, like, what's the lesser of two evils in reference,
Right.
money?
And you
I
just
don't know.
that yet.
Right, I don't know what it
Right.
costs to do a berm versus what it would cost to raise a dike. But I look at it just like Dave said, is building that berm, it's gotta be so high, and with the height, it's gotta be so wide. Now you talk about length, you wanna make sure that the length is there, so we don't transfer water. Instead of flooding the area that flooded, now we divert that area, now we'll flood in a whole nother area.
Right.
So that's where I was
Or the
looking
same
at.
area, because it just finds a
It
different way
just
to get
finds
there.
it, right,
To the left.
and that's what I was more like getting at is, what's the cheaper dollar amount to help fix a problem until we're able to get adequate money in order to take it to that next step to fix the next
And
step.
I-
Because
I just caution though, you can't just build a berm that's not armored and engineered,
Right.
okay? And because, in my world, you say berm and I'm thinking of just a mound of dirt. And that won't provide the engineering security and stability that, this community should demand, and that you as responsible
And the-
professionals.
The armoring that you talk about is the stones, the rocks and the
and the-
whatever's underneath
the
that.
internal structure, and I brought a couple of copies of the design for you to look at, Chief. And so you can, but, there was geological borings done, there was all sorts of, homework done to design these dikes that, when you look at them on the surface, it's just like they're earth covered and, paved.
And now they have nice grass.
Yeah, but there's
Oh,
all
sorry.
sorts of guts tucked in there
Right.
to keep them, stable and under pretty tough storm conditions. And that, I think, that's where it gets expensive.
Well, so can you, it seems like if you have a concept plan and the engineering done, and you've got all that done, oftentimes money becomes available, you've got a plan, and you can get the funding. So is it difficult to get funding for the engineering and the design? Kind of the concept, like I look at the mound coming off of Broad Dyke, and if you're gonna then go down and protect the strand, like we would go down like this, and what, you know, I mean, somebody's got to design it, that it's not me. And it's got to be engineered, like you said, with the tapering and all of that. Can you get funding for that so that, and then you can have the community reviews and all of that if you had a concept plan that was engineered?
Well, concept plan is exactly that, Gail. It's a concept without,
Detail.
Without
without
the
the
engineering
engineering
and without the
detail. And that's what
engineering.
you pay for when you hire, good folks and smart folks like Dave and Dave's company. No, I mean, the dike projects were, $6-7 million. I mean, it was almost $1 million worth of engineering involved there. And when you look at
Oh,
these
so-
plans, it's an expensive,
Right. So are these are including engineering? Is that what you're saying? These estimates?
Honestly, I don't remember. There should at least be a description
It
somewhere.
doesn't say that there, so it's actually more than that.
And these numbers are solid, and like Dave said, he used experts from his company. You could go
Okay.
back and review those and look
Right.
at some of the high cost items that have changed since 2019 to 2022
Mhm.
and refresh those numbers relatively quickly. Because, we're all smart people, the cost of everything has gone up, I can tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it is pretty all-inclusive. Contractor overhead, profit, administration, legal, engineering costs,
Oh,
and
cool.
contingency. What I don't think it included, back to where we were a moment ago, is, land. Would there have to be an actual
Right.
purchase right of way, which of course can be very expensive, or even easements?
Yeah.
May need some sort of a cash, or, if we're in eminent domain, but, or depending on how all that would play out, but.
I was thinking, on page 27 here, it talks about this vinyl sheet piling. And it seems to me, yes, it can be ugly, but if you're down the Gamba Quarter Dike, nobody's there. I don't know why we couldn't do that instead of having, the environmental concerns and the, all of that. And also maybe even to it, Army Creek in some part of Broad, we could do that. And then that would be, I think, cheaper than even the berm, because you don't have to do the extension or,
Mhm.
right? Is that correct? I'm not sure about that now that I say that. Yeah.
Cost-effective
Yeah.
alternative.
And that, keep that stuff out of the sight of most people. And with the understanding that people will understand that you're protecting. And then do the berm that you're talking about, Gail, between the Broad and the Gamba Corda, that's more expensive, but is more
The-
acceptable.
The sheeting, whether it's steel or whatever, I assume that goes on the riverside.
Again, it hasn't been designed, but that would be the logical place. If we can go back, we're back to where Gail was a moment ago. It was about a year ago, and it was for a client in Maryland, not Delaware. But we submitted for a FEMA grant, which of course would be administered to MEMA, not FEMA, for a study. We used the study very, very similar to this as its basis. So to answer your question, I believe, again, funding multiple sources out there, who knows what sources may be available in the future, but
So David, are
you
you
could,
saying
you
we-
could absolutely get money to do.
Are you
design.
saying we
To do
could
the
use this,
engineering and design.
this actual report that was
as
updated?
as a basis for, call it proof of, well, I don't even want to call it proof of concept. It's a concept of concept design. That, you certainly could build from this, but you could say, hey, this is what we're thinking, we did some level of due diligence here. We identified the environmental concerns. That's the other thing. Any funding agencies, of course, look at the environmental concerns, and these are some options we've come up with. We're seeking X dollars to turn these very conceptual ideas into actual plans.
So
Yeah,
concept
that's-
plan and then to
Yeah,
follow
into
by an
actual
engineering
design.
plan and specification.
Yeah, that's a fundable, at
Okay.
least by some FEMA sources.
Okay, This is FEMA.
Yeah, with the pre-disaster mitigation grants, I think, and now it's like the building resilient something community. They keep changing the names of it.
Does FEMA fund 100%?
I don't think anybody funds 100%. For the one I'm recalling, I think it might have been, it was actually pretty healthy. It was like a 3/4, 1/4, I think. It's an excellent question that you're not going to get anybody. Well, very unlikely you'll get anybody to give you 100%. You could even be looking at.
They
maybe
want you to
50%.
have skin in the game.
Yeah,
Right.
which makes sense.
Which
Right,
is-
it
yeah,
does.
they
So
should.
does the 25% have to come from the city itself, or can it come from another source?
Typically a non-federal source.
Ah.
Whatever that might be.
You can
Okay.
piece it together with your local conservation district, who's very good at leveraging funds.
Yeah, yeah. I
You
hear
have
they're
state funds,
just
Kevin's right, you
golden
can't
dough.
match federal funds with federal funds.
But it could be a combination of district, state, city,
City trustees.
you know,
Mhm.
Which happens more and more these days, it's packaging things together.
So we could actually take this, decide what part of it we want, that, I think,
Mhm.
and then using this with updated numbers that we could get from you and whoever
Right,
put this together,
right.
and actually present it fairly quickly.
Yeah, actually.
So one of the biggest things is, do you want to go 9 feet? Do you want to go 10 and a half? Do you want to go 13.5, whatever?
I think the consensus is that it's 10 and a half. Am I wrong
So
about that?
I would like to hear what the study has to shows.
What
I-
this,
I
this
would
new
like-
study?
Yeah, the study
like-
that currently is going on. I would like.
You want to
hear
wait till that?
And the reason why I say that is because it's the most recent study.
Yeah, okay.
You know what I mean? So it will be able to get
Would-
more
would that help with-
more accurate information with how things have changed from 2017.
But at least in the
Versus-
interim, we can
versus
maybe
now.
get the updated numbers,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I think Gail, I'm sorry,
Alice?
Alice, you're going in the right direction, that with not a monumental amount of effort, that report could be updated. Certainly, because I think you totally took a pass on any sort of a cost benefit. That would be the other big thing that it's lacking, and back to the FEMA, that was a requirement for FEMA. And depending on your source, it may be a requirement anyway. So back to where we're like about a half hour ago of how many, at this elevation, how many structures do you not incur the costs of damaging on? And that's kind of more the thing is, what are you not damaging, not how much are you?
Will FEMA require that you say this would be the damage if we don't raise it
Yeah,
or
they will
something like
want it-
that?
They will want it to be.
And that will have to
Cost
be at
benefit.
least the cost of, okay.
Yeah.
They want the no action.
The current study, has data collection actually begun on that yet?
Yes, it actually began right around the new year. Again, McBride and Ziegler is doing the actual survey work. They've given me a approximate end date of about June 30, so it's really coming right up. Tetra Tech, which is where the city's historic architect is employed, they are the ones doing the basement survey. I'm told they have started, but I've not gotten an update.
They haven't been to my house.
Yeah.
They haven't
okay.
come to mind.
Yeah, honestly, I'm
And I wondered if they were getting any kickback from residents about
I'm
letting them
wondering the
into
same
the
thing. Yeah.
homes and stuff.
I heard somebody who's thought that they were there from the assessor.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard that too, that people are afraid that
Right.
they'll come in and see my house and my taxes will go up. Well, we know that's gonna happen anyway from the county thing perhaps,
Yeah.
but yeah, just curious.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
So does anybody think, I'm trying to get a sense here. Does anybody think we should go to 13 feet? We should start with that? Anybody? No.
Mhm.
How about 10 and a half? Does everybody think that's a good thing, or Gail, you
It-
think
it
that's too
seems-
much? Yeah?
I think so.
That
Okay.
takes us to 2050 pretty
Right.
safely, correct?
How was, when you guys met with Jeff?
Right.
Did you guys meet with him I'm assuming at low tide?
Yes.
Yes.
And what was Jeff's input on the dikes, how they work? The height that it is now versus the height that he felt as though it should be? And I just look at that because, he's the building official. So I was just curious what input that he had, the information. that
Well, I
he gave
misunderstood everything he
you
said
guys.
apparently, so.
So Jeff would love to see a berm to protect the historic district, to connect the dikes that we have. I'm not sure we really talked about the elevation. I mean, I think he's where we are now. I mean, we realize that we're not
He did-
FEMA,
Is the.
He did say, though, that some people get a little water in their basements, so what? It's basically, but I do think that he is, really is supporting of the whole.
Is-
and I
is-
mean,
raising.
they're working well. I mean,
That's my next question. The maintenance end of it and all, are they,
It's a concern of mine. And I
Okay.
asked Jeff about that and he said, I think what he said is the US Corps of Engineers does that.
The
Army.
city is responsible for maintaining the dikes. And what the Corps periodically comes back and inspects them to
Okay.
make sure they're being maintained according to, there's a maintenance plan for each of the dikes.
Okay,
And so, you gotta keep trees off the dike, you gotta keep vegetation down. And they come through and as long as the Corps gives their approval of the inspection, then it preserves the eligibility for funding, federal reimbursement funding of, I think it's around 70% in the event of a declared emergency and there's damage to the dike. As long as it's been well maintained and the Corps signed off on it, then you're eligible for federal funding.
is that a yearly thing for the Corps?
Jeff said, I think every 2 years.
I was gonna say every 2 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I believe they're coming up.
And he said, they've been looking real good. And I said, yeah, but that hole, there's that big hole down there.
well, he told me some figure and it was quite a bit that the city pays for maintenance of the dikes, that, for the animals that. grow
Right, they pay
through and-
somebody $25,000 a year, he said,
To,
to.
So,
prevent
so
the
I know
animal-
one of the issues that they had down, like the Bull Hill dike there, is the beaver dam, or the beavers making.
You think they'd be building the dam?
And I know they would have to, like the city would have to go and clean it out and that kind of stuff. So I was just curious on the functionality with maintenance and that kind of stuff, is it?
he's very dike positive. I mean, and when you think about it, 1600 they were built and
Right.
they've
Amazing.
done a pretty good job for us
Yeah.
all this time, so.
So if we were to ask for updated numbers, could ACOM do that? And how much would it cost for us to get that done?
Yeah, we're actually pretty much obligated to do that, for even though it was phrased differently. What we're essentially talking about as the last step in what we're all calling kind of the current project is get all this data and update our models.
Can we do
didn't, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're
Is
already
everybody
committed.
on board with
committed to
that,
doing.
getting these numbers updated? Yes?
Yeah.
No?
But no,
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I have
Yeah.
to, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that was
that's
part of
what
the
you guys
grant.
said.
I told the grant we're
Oh,
gonna do
okay,
this, this,
all
this, and this. So-
Okay.
But,
And that June 30th, it's right around the corner.
We,
Pardon?
I
I
think
said
think
if
we
we
still
June
need to
30th
deal
dates
with.
right
Right,
this,
well, I need the
the
basement data
strand
too,
and
so that might be a
how
little
do
bit
we
longer.
deal
but-
with that if
Well, I
not
agree with that.
everybody buys into
But-
it.
I agree with that, but I think we can pick and choose based on the fact that they have individual numbers here, so I agree with you totally. We don't know yet what we've decided to do.
And there's all kinds of options for that space. Delaware Street, basically,
Right.
and the wharf before
Right.
we get.
I think a floating wharf would be good, don't you think? Kidding.
I like the thing where you can drive over it and then when.
Oh, this.
When it
this
comes
thing.
up,
it
right?
Comes up.
Yeah, they have a picture of that.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah,
So I'm sorry, let me,
Oh,
because
go
I think
ahead.
it's really important. I think I might have misled you a moment ago. So the data is, we have no, although
Not
Kevin, I
flood
know you
proofing.
might have some opportunity here with some of your funding, but what we're tasked to do really has, from a conceptual design standpoint, really nothing to do with the dikes. From the cost benefit standpoint, we need the data, but what we really want this data for is to take another, I keep calling it the bite of the apple of the flood proofing.
right.
We're not redoing these concept designs. We're not updating those costs. That's a separate.
Oh, really? So you can't, for instance, tell us what the cost would be of raising the dikes now?
Well, I mean, if it's just like an inflationary factor from 2019 to 20, I mean, that,
You think that would be enough for,
yeah, pretty close.
yeah?
Yeah. Again, depending on the source and what, you just can't submit an application saying, I'd like to build a dike here. There, it could be some pie in the sky concept. They want to at least see some due diligence.
Right.
So we could probably update the costing, but what I want to make sure nobody is under the impression of we're like redoing these concept designs or going to.
Oh, no.
No, that
No,
has
no.
nothing to do with what we're working
No.
on now.
And as a matter of fact, we have to look at it and see, I mean, I think we've made progress if we say we're going to 10.5. Don't you think? I mean, that's it's a big deal. I know, Tim, you'd rather wait until,
That it's our recommendation.
but yeah, and we will, but I think preliminarily, right? We're talking about that rather than the 13.5, which I think would be out of the range of our ability to do and get and have approved and all that stuff.
I don't think you want to appear to be greedy and
Exactly.
asking for 13.
Right.
Let's go a
Yeah,
middle of the road
right.
approach.
Yeah, and 10.5 takes us to 2050 at the high end. This is the high end anyway, right? I mean,
Well,
they're
yeah,
saying,
I caution if you want to make like a preliminary, you know, and you're and I understand the concept, so you don't, you know, to go to 13.5, I mean, just such a huge leap, maybe do it more incrementally. There's certainly logic to that, but I go to where I was a moment ago. You really kind of have to see that the cost benefit, what is the millions you're gonna spend going to 10.5?
yes,
What damages does that prevent? from
I
happening?
understand what you're saying.
So.
Yeah, we
you
can't
know,
do anything
you
until we
can't
have
do-
that
yeah,
cost benefit.
you really,
Yeah,
really.
I understand that part.
And so I know you're getting something in June, but not the
So-
basement.
So, no, what did we, for a couple of, one intentional and one unintentional, kind of lagged the basement survey after the floor elevation survey. So what McBride and Ziegler is doing is really quite simple. It's probably happened at of either all or most of your yards, is what is the first floor elevation? What is the, you know, where the steps up to your house, what is that elevation? And then what is typically the lowest adjacent ground? They usually take 4 spots, you know, 4 corners of a house. What is that lowest adjacent ground? Because that's obviously where the floodwaters would start. So that gives you that elevation that it is so critical. What they are not doing, McBride and Ziegler is not doing, is going inside any structure, at least not that I'm aware of. And so we're still kind of blind as far as what basements may be. Are there basements there? Probably, or maybe it's just a crawl space.
Aren't they gonna ask those questions though, or they?
Yes, they are supposed to.
Tetra Tech.
Yes, Tetra Tech. Is it a finished basement? Are there any vents there now? Any other particulars, like 2 or 3 other data points in there? That's essentially what they're seeking, because now we're back to the practical side or impractical side of flood proofing. You know, I'm talking in these very loose general terms that, you know, if your floor elevation's at 10, but the flood waters are 9.5, and you put wet flood proofing in, you just flood out the basement. Well, that could be a $50,000 finished basement. So,
Yeah,
you know, like I said,
That's true.
we're,
Yeah.
you know, we need at least some data to try to back
Right.
to assessing. And we haven't even talked about this yet, the famous 50% rule with FEMA. If you're going to spend more than 50% of a structure's value flood proofing it, they say you just got to make the structure compliant, forget the flood proofing. Now, with an existing structure, then it gets a lot more
what does that
messy
mean?
and
You
red.
have to raise it or something like that? When you say make it compliant?
Yeah, you have to, so basically, yes, they're not gonna, FEMA, particularly if you're paying flood insurance and I'm fairly good with FEMA regs, but I want to make sure I may occasionally misspeak, because of course their regs are huge, but FEMA will not give you flood insurance for a structure that you spent more than 50% of its value trying to protect it from flooding. They say, just make it compliant. In other words, raise it, you know, get it out of the floodplain, you know, whatever. So again, FEMA
If you got $1
regulations
million
right
house,
now
the
are,
chances are pretty slight that you're gonna spend $500,000, right, to flood proof it? No? Would it
No.
cost $500,000?
No, well, no.
Yeah.
But, you know, as I say, rules is rules, and, you know, they are in existence now. But again, a lot of the FEMA regs, and this goes to the report I was refreshing my memory this morning, like the city's regs about the flood proofing, applies to dry flood proofing. Sorry, I'm documenting things actually once here. If you were putting up a brand new residential structure, you could not dry flood proof it. FEMA will not let you do that with a residential structure. You can only dry flood proof a non-residential structure.
Wow.
But the wording of the city's code is, you know, anything, I guess the code came in like 1974 or something like that, anything that predates 1974, which is of course the vast majority of structures in Newcastle, that really wouldn't apply. So we get into some, we haven't talked about, maybe some legal interpretation
So that
issues
new-
on some of this
New
well.
structure being built on the string. There's a new foundation.
Oh, okay.
I took a walk before the
Yes.
meeting.
Oh, okay.
There is.
And so I guess, you know, if I'm hearing it correctly, in FEMA's eyes, that thing better be out of
It has to
it
be.
better be compliant.
It doesn't look like it is, does it?
I don't, you know. It's
It doesn't
hard
look
to
that
say,
high.
you know,
But I could, you know, could be, they haven't started.
I mean, the foundation's
I'll-
pretty
Yeah,
high.
I'll take
Right.
a spin by there.
Yeah.
you know.
Right, and there's 2 lots on either side that will be built on.
Yeah.
They've been sold.
What's real interesting, if you ever take us, go to like Kitts Hummock or some of those, the Bay Beach communities, it really is kind of, you know, you got these, you know, low houses like way up here because their flood elevation is like 10 feet over the ground elevation. It's kind of interesting the hodgepodge you get.
So getting back to the basement study,
Oh, right.
is that June 2 or is that?
No, well, again, I need to kind of
Paul?
start rattling Tetra Tech's cage a little bit.
Okay.
I'm not sure where they're at, and we did lag them a little bit. So I would call that maybe more like a July or August.
And you need that to do the cost benefit. You need that data too, or?
Yeah, we really do.
And they're doing every house. Is it just in the historic district or is it in all
No,
of
they have
Newcastle?
like, Van Dyke Village and some of them, I mean, there's a lot of, if you saw the flood, the vulnerability assessment. No, it's not the
Okay.
historic district. In fact, the historic district sits relatively high. There are other parts of the city that are a lot lower.
And on a somewhat related subject, what about River's Edge development right on the water? I mean, does that affect our ability to withstand floods if so much of the waterfront it's got to be impermeable at some point, right?
Yeah, it could affect back to you know, in a storm event or something, amount of
Right.
runoff, although theoretically they designed a stormwater management system. And I don't even know if they have, you know, what their BMPs, it's been so many years since I saw plans for that.
It's huge
Right.
development.
But we talked about this probably the last 2 meetings. From a like sea level resiliency standpoint, it's not gonna matter.
It isn't.
You're dealing with the entire Delaware River. You could
Right.
put as much dirt as you want out there, and it's just not gonna, you know, this much maybe, but no appreciable amount would it cause additional flooding.
But they're going to be built within the parameters of the 18 inches and the whole thing anyway,
They
right?
should
They
have
have to.
floor, every single house there, brand new residential construction should all be above the floodplain,
Yeah.
plus the 18 inches.
Can I ask about this
Sure.
flood break system? I thought that was very
Kind of interesting, isn't
interesting.
it? Yeah.
So let's say we did a berm and then the sea level rose, could you put one of these on top of it to later? Are you,
I suppose so.
I-
We kind of looked at it more, but filling in the gaps.
I think the
If you
answer
answered it
is
correctly.
maybe it would depend on how structurally demanding that system is, so that you gotta anchor it into something, you know, that with the force of water, it just doesn't collapse or it just doesn't rip the top of the dike off.
right.
Yeah.
They just taught in this report, it
Mm.
talks about maybe doing a small berm and then putting one of these on top of it.
Right.
So I was just curious, well, if we did a berm, then later we need to do something else. Could we just stick one of these on top?
Yeah, and then who knows what technology may exist in.
Right, that's very
Honestly,
true.
You know, honestly, we didn't really think about it. We made it just purely either do it with earth, you know, for the dikes, the existing ones, or put these ugly sheet, you know,
Right.
sheet piling in. You know, I guess really there is like a third option of something that would raise like this, but Kevin's right. Think about raising it, and then if the water goes on that, it would want to rip whatever it's
Uh-huh.
anchoring. It would be really tough, but that's, you know, structural engineers do that stuff.
Yeah,
so.
two things about that, though. It sounds like it's the most expensive option.
Right.
That here, but also it says in here, and then it disappears into the ground. But this doesn't look like it disappears into the ground. It looks like it just sits on top, doesn't it? Like,
I think they're
turn the
gonna like
page.
recess it a little
Huh?
bit.
I mean, they say they can make it look like asphalt or bricks
Okay,
or
so-
whatever, so it
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
disappears.
and you recess it a little bit. I mean, there might be a
Yeah,
little bit of a bump.
Put
in the
some
road.
fake flowers on it when it goes down.
There you go,
Flowers
like
pop
an
up.
outline kind of thing, yeah. But I thought when I said it disappeared into the ground, and I looked at this and I thought, that doesn't look like it's disappearing into the ground, unless it disappears behind that top of the berm, maybe, so if you're looking at it, it disappears, but it comes up if you're on the other side, the riverside, let's say, but
Mhm.
anyway. So, what do we have to do to ask for this to be updated? I mean, do you need a special request or
No,
is
I
it
think
enough
that
right
I'm
now?
pretty much already, not in so many words, but for all intents and purposes, we're already committed to doing it.
Okay, great. So are we all agreed that we're gonna do that? Everybody? Yes? Okay. Does anybody else have any topics that they want to talk about?
What other consensus can we come to tonight?
Yeah, it'd be great. With what? You got an idea?
Oh, you choose.
Well,
The gap, perhaps?
oh, yeah. Well, I think in my mind, I would think that whatever we do for the other dikes that are not in a area where there's residences that, that would be looking at it. For instance, at the Broad Dyke, but up the other side of Broad Dyke, let's say. I know you look at Broad Dyke, actually, you do.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
But, or Gambacorta, which is basically just marsh there, but it's also on the path.
well, remember, we've got them at 8.5 feet, so you're talking about,
So that wouldn't be very.
you're not
very
talking
high.
about something
Not-
very
But it would-
high.
Right, but it would be 2 feet high, right? 2 feet high.
2 feet
Yeah, it
or
wouldn't
so
be too bad.
high.
Right.
I don't know how far down it has to go, I'm sure.
It's the width.
You're not,
That's the big,
but this is the pilings we're talking about, putting in the
Oh, okay.
pilings
Like
instead
the
of. doing-
steel sheet
The sheet
pile or
pile,
the,
See, I'm also
the
trying to
vinyl.
avoid environmental problems, with the taking of more ground and widening it, the whole thing, right? The pilings would have less of an environmental concern, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah. But just.
No?
No, probably.
Yeah.
But
according to this, it does.
Well, at least let's say it is right now without getting too far into the weeds of it. But so I was thinking that between Gambacorta and Broad, it should be a berm, like a regular berm, except for Delaware Street, which would have to be something that you could, go up and down like that. Well, they said logs. I'm not sure what that is, but is that something you take out of somewhere and put it in there
That
rather than?
logs, yeah,
Something that you put in.
Or
when-
something like this, that gate, that comes up. Well, they wouldn't, but it wouldn't be. Was it thermostatic? Is that what you said?
there's an active,
Hydrostatic.
active and passive ways to do
Hydrostatic.
this. The passive, as the name implies, it just kind of happens on its own. So the buoyancy would raise a gate, as opposed to the log where someone's got to go, oh, heck, the storm's coming, I got to remember to put those logs in.
Right,
Pros and cons, either, everything
Right.
is pros and cons.
right. So do we have a consensus about that we should put a berm, an earthen berm between Gambacorta and Broad? Is that something that everybody can agree with?
I
Tim?
think so,
Yes? Okay. So
But-
that,
but it does need to be drawn and engineered.
oh, God, yes.
And
I'm just
agreed
saying as far as
upon
the-
by-
Agreed
I'm
upon.
just talking about for as a concept.
Okay. yes.
A concept that's a berm at least. And the other things, maybe we have a little bit more flexibility for cost wise and looks wise, right? Because Gambacorta doesn't have to look great because nobody's there. As a matter of fact, there's a, you have to go through that gate, not Gambacorta, Buttonwood. I meant, not Gambacorta, Buttonwood is really far away from,
From where the
from-
people live.
yeah, where people are, so you could really just put that vinyl thing. I know I'm talking, but anybody else want to say, I mean, that to me is like an easier choice if it's cheaper.
Well, and we might want to take a road trip to Red Lion Dyke.
Yeah, good
I
idea,
don't know where, I mean, I know
Yeah,
where Red Lion
access
is.
is tough there.
is it?
Access, I don't.
You have to get,
you
Well,
have
that's
to-
why they
you
have
get
to.
permission from the chemical company that owns
Oh,
like half the thing to get out there.
oh, is there anywhere else that you can see it?
No.
no place else around has that particular,
Steel sheeting,
or the vinyl.
I'm not aware of vinyl sheeting.
So that's what it
Vinyl sheet
refers to
tile.
here.
Yeah, I don't know where there's any visible.
No, okay.
I'm sorry, and, you know, I can see if I can find out where there's some, you know, sheet pile, but I just know it's not easy to do.
Do you know anywhere where they have this, the hydrostatic, whatever it is thing, the gate? Is there some place where we could take a look at that in real life?
Oh, that, no, ma'am, I don't.
And how about something for Delaware Street? Can you think of an example of city that's done that?
No.
So, what do we want to do at our next meeting then?
Well, I think one thing we could do before is to start researching some of the funding.
So you have that
I
list that you
can,
got?
yes, I can send that, but I haven't.
What I'm
looked at
thinking is
any
maybe
of the
we divide
links.
divide it up between the members of the task force maybe?
It's
With
down,
information, facts and
no,
figures,
down at the bottom.
funding resource.
Oh, okay.
Oh, this is just DENREC and FEMA. Looks like.
Yeah,
You
are
do-
there
you
any
do.
other funding sources that we could research what they hand?
Is that what they gave out
Yes.
in Dover a couple weeks ago? That was a pretty all encompassing list.
Okay,
I would say definitely start with that. Let me take another look at it, but
All right.
I'm not sure. I'm gonna come up with a whole lot more.
Well, they have FEMA, they have DENREC, and they have UD, and that's
Oh,
all
I
I've
was just
got.
gonna say, because the university, didn't I, as before the first meeting, I'm sorry, I got two of these things. It might be confusing the two
I know,
projects, but didn't I kind of come up with a one-page list of links and resources? I thought I did.
Yes,
And
this
one
is
of
on
those,
this,
like,
right, the last page is
yeah, okay, had, like, I know the university and it's
additional
like,
resources,
yeah, with
yeah,
Delaware Coastal Program.
Delaware Sea Grant,
Yeah,
uh,
there were a couple of UD things at the bottom of that,
yes,
weren't there?
complete communities at University of Delaware,
Yeah,
and database for funding
Bingo.
resilient communities. That's what we
Bingo.
want, right?
yeah, you might want to look at that. I'm
Yeah.
gonna guess there's gonna be a lot of redundancy, and I don't know
Okay.
how often it's updated. That and the group Rascal, and I think they're, it
Rascal.
was probably at the very top of the list. The Resilient and Sustainable Communities League in Delaware. I think they have a resources page on their
Yes,
website.
we have them on this list as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question that's not totally related, but I think kind of is, that we haven't really talked about at all, and that is you have sea level rise, but then in storms, you also have waves.
yeah.
And it was mentioned in one of these about wave attenuation. And I just wondered, is that something we should be thinking about, or what, how do you attenuate waves?
Yeah, that's what Kevin keeps talking about, like the anchoring and things like that. Where I thought you were going with your question, I believe I used the word bathtub model before, back when I was answering Tim's question a few minutes ago. We just took the FEMA flood elevation and added just purely a static. We did not, because now this gets really complicated modeling of wave actions and things like that. That I think is kind of getting into more of a design detail, how you would anchor some of these things with waves. Wave damage can be huge.
Right,
And you've got, we're actually working with the city now on potentially putting a floating pier off the pier that was constructed there a few years ago. And we're dealing with just, enormous wave problems on a floating pier. It's a extremely complicated design. So yeah, you're asking the right questions, unfortunately.
right, because sea
Again, as
level
Kevin
rise, we're
Have
thinking
great answers for you tonight.
2050, 10.5 will be enough,
Right.
but that's on a calm day when you just have water, not waves.
So that 10.5 doesn't take that into consideration? No?
This gets complicated into how FEMA does their mapping. I'd have to pull out the FEMA flood map, because FEMA maps also have, now I'm really gonna confuse you. what's called a LIMWA line, the line of moderate wave action. They also have what's called the AE zone, which is more of a static elevation, and the VE zone, which is a velocity thing. And I really have to look, because Newcastle has them all, everybody up and down the state has them all. So this, now we're really getting massively into the weeds of design details. But the wave action would need to be taken into account at some point, at least from an anchoring, armoring kind of a standpoint.
Well, you were talking mostly about damage to the dikes though, right? I mean, when you're talking about wave, you're talking about them going way over the dikes. Am I right about that? You're talking about overtopping the dikes with the
I'm
waves?
talking about, do we need to consider wave attenuation in, for both, really?
Yes. Yes.
It's complicated.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is.
And it's cold. in here, too, you know, so it
Hmm?
rains.
Yeah.
an hour and a half. Why don't, you know, this is ignorant. Why don't you change it so that people can get in and have to stand up there, talk. You've said the same things, especially you. You say the same things and ask the same questions. If you don't want people to come to your meetings, I don't get it. Why are we made to wait out here for an hour and a half? It's just not right. I mean, I've chaired meetings. I just wouldn't do that to people. It's not right. Could you give us consideration?
I'm not
next
sure I
time?
understand. I'm not sure. Well,
Why do we have to wait an hour and a half to make our comments? Why
because
can't
Mr.
we-
Whitehead, here's the reason. Because this isn't a regular kind of meeting like a council meeting or something like that.
I know
This is
that,
mostly goes for discussion. And a lot of the discussion is learning.
but can't we have our say and send this on our way?
Why don't you do that? Why don't you tell me what you want to say and then you
Okay,
can go in.
don't rush me off. Please, please, okay. And I think Dave will back me on this. Number one, I'll volunteer for this committee. You need help. You need some professional help. Dave's given it to you, but I'll volunteer. Now, number one, as a licensed surveyor, Dave will back me up. As a PE and someone as an architect, we're the only 3 people of professions that can sign these elevation certificates. Okay? So I have something to say as a professional. I spoke, and I'm sorry, this is my way. It's always been 81.
Just you, that's fine.
Okay,
You don't have
don't
to tell.
push me on.
No, I'm saying, just get to the point. What did you want to say?
Yeah, don't push me, okay? Okay, what I want to say, I have had discussion with Bergstrom, with Jeff Bergstrom. He said, I asked him my highly question. And I can really help you here, and I think Dave will go along with me. The way you're set up now, you're 1.5 feet. What is it?
The freeboard?
Freeboard,
Right.
okay. And I said, is that set? He said, no, the town can change that. He said, I don't disagree with you, Tom. It's not his place. I spent a lot of time, got no pay, just as a citizen, because I think I can help. Now, one of the best things you could do, and I think this would address Gail and Justice Sites or her husband, okay, out of respect. I really think one of your solutions are to change and make your 100-year flood elevation or your base flood elevation down below crawl space level. Don't fool around with 1.5 feet. Go below that if you put a cellar in for new construction. And that's gonna happen way before any of these firms. I think Jeff is for that. The most reasonable fee would be for it. I went down the other day in my basement. Okay, Gail knows where I live. It was lower. We're above, we're up probably elevation 22 near Plum Alley. Okay, why in the world would you ever put 100-year flood elevation? Let's say if this is your floor, why would you put it down here 1.5 feet? Why would you not go to below the basement? And I would use the 10.5, no problem with 10.5. But I would use 10.5. What problem would go below the lowest slab? I was standing in my basement the other day and saying, can you imagine anyone wanting water in their crawl space or their basement 1.5 feet below their floor level? No one with any reasoning power at all would want that. That's something that town could mandate. Any new construction, I think the town would be liable or really remiss if they would carry forward with this 1.5 feet. That can be changed in an instant, and there's new homes going in there. Near you, where you know the 3 homes.
Well,
So my point is, for new construction now, don't let these new homes be built without lowering that base flood elevation.
okay,
Why would you want to use all this expensive waterproofing this and that? Another thing, your basement, the way things are set up now, if you build up, you could leave your electric in the crawl space, your plumbing, your heating, everything. In the long run, it makes sense.
okay.
Real.
The only thing is I can say right now is what we're trying to do is address the flood prevention from the point of view
Well, I
of
understand.
dikes, correct?
But wait a minute, for
I understand what I do understand what you're saying.
For immediate help,
Yes.
for immediate help. And also, I think sometimes you put too much burden on the building inspector. He's not a professional engineer or licensed surveyor. I can tell you this, through my experience over in Pennsville. The engineer, they had their floodplain officer. The engineer was always the floodplain officer. One year they had a professional surveyor. You're putting him in harm's way.
Okay, I take your point, and
Okay.
that's not something that we really can address, but
Yeah, I think you
The
could.
recommendation.
Well,
yeah, okay.
if I may, if I can elaborate a little or narrow it a little bit. Mr. Whitehead, correct?
Tom,
Right, is correct. You can go above and beyond any FEMA regulation if you want. There's not a thing in the world stopping the city, and that actually was one of the recommendations. And actually, Alice, I think you mentioned top of the meeting in one of your, look at the city code.
Right, yes.
You know,
that-
there may
yeah,
be
yeah.
opportunity.
We will definitely do that.
moving forward.
Yeah,
You know,
Man,
it gets a little more subjective, and of course, then you get to, push back from the development community, that's too expensive,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
that, but he's
Nancy?
absolutely correct, you can go above and beyond.
Are you addressing any of the back street flooding? I mean, I've lived here for 23 years, and for the last 4 years, I flood and I'm high.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this water's coming from someplace.
As a matter of fact, before the meeting started, I was asking David about that because when I went on the tour with Jeff, he said that we are like getting the stormwater from all of Newcastle County and, and it's the dikes are really high for that reason and everything. And
Well, the little storm sewer is always full of debris. And then the new people that are constructed,
Right.
doing the tear down and the rebuild, all of their garbage flows right down by my house.
Man, what street are you talking about?
Fourth and Harmony, right at the corner.
And I know,
The water comes down Fourth. If we have a nor'easter, it blows up Fourth, comes Harmony. So we have a massive swirling mess.
I
there.
think Lisa Whitaker has the same problem. She says her backyard, 4th Street, I think she's on 4th Street,
Well,
just
she's
as
way
a,
up.
as a puddle for, when there's
She's
a
way up
storm.
in the middle of the street. I'm on the corner where all the water comes from four directions.
Yeah, I think we do
And
have
then
to address that.
Okay, and then the sewer for the whole city
Uh-huh.
is always plugged because the main drain is on the wrong side of the street. There's been $80,000 in the kitty since I moved here 23 years ago. It's never been spent. Well, they say it's never been spent. They've never spent it on fixing this problem. Now, Tom Freebury's lost a car down there. I mean, there have been numbers of things that Jeff Bergstrom comes out and poo-poos. Oh, Nancy, we're gonna fix this. Well, he hasn't fixed the damn thing in 23 years and I'm still waiting. It just gets worse.
Okay.
And Sixth Street also, Bergstrom told me years ago that Sixth Street is very liable to flooding.
It does flood. Those apartments get wet. Right on the corner of Sixth and
And that's a drainage problem, right?
it's all drainage problem.
Yeah,
But when it rains, I mean, just a typical rain,
right.
we have water that swells. Now, I've watched a car move in the currents. Move.
Could I finish? I just had a couple things I want to say. Then I'll finish, please. And I say this is not a member of the new Board of Adjustment. I want to tell you this, and I'm proud of it. I was the one who brought up the initiative for this new board to Joe Day. Okay, I don't want any platitude to that, but I had to tell you, it's one of the best things now that people in Newcastle have their residents deciding things. And I spent a lot of time on that, contacting Ellesmere, Newark, the county, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. I think it was a travesty the way it was set up.
That's
No,
really
wait a
not our
minute.
bailiwick, Mr. White.
I-
We can
I
stick to
know
the
that.
flooding problems.
I
Yeah.
understand that, okay, you're talking about that. But I'm just saying, you need people like me and other people to bring things up, or there's never gonna be change.
Okay,
I think of myself and then I'll go. 1963 for 9 months. I was down in Cuba. We were quarantined in. Okay, there was 500 CVs, 500 Marines.
does this have a relevance to what we're
Yeah,
discussing?
yeah,
Okay,
it does if you can follow it. Okay, and I have the right. I have the right to say what I want to say. Okay. I was a veteran protecting some of the people here, probably most of you who didn't go in the service. And if you didn't, it was just a time. I was proud to do that. But everyone has the right to vote. That's a thing in the Constitution. Everyone has that right. All the residents of the town have that right to decide their future. And I'm just saying, I, for a long time, was really put off with this, and I'm glad we have it.
great. Okay, thank you
So
very
that's
much.
all.
I appreciate it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Tom. Okay.
You have
Does
something
anybody-
to say?
Anything else that anybody has to offer?
No, it's out of respect, sir, when you're speaking. I'm just
Okay,
looking
and
at you.
I don't want that, but But I'm just thinking, I'm a father, by the way, was almost killed in World War II. I lost a cousin in Korea,
I'm very sorry.
you know, yeah.
If
And my offer goes, I'd be glad to help you.
Okay, thank you
And
very
I
much.
can do that.
Appreciate it.
I don't know if you're taking public comments now.
Yes,
Okay.
apparently, yes. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a question first, which is, can the audience, which consists of me now, but at some point see the blue books that you all were given? It sounds.
There's
very
one
useful.
up right here.
Oh, okay.
You can have
Oh,
a copy if
lovely.
you
I
want.
didn't realize that was.
It's a public, yeah.
Thank you. Ready
The two
again.
separate.
And, and I just had a couple of comments. One was that, with reference to the dike height, I remember I was a trustee and I went to some of the meetings when the dikes were raised, which was, I don't know, 12 or 14 years ago. Remember-
2014, I think it was, wasn't it? Mhm.
And Dave Carter was there, I remember.
Mhm.
And I remember we were told, I think you verified the fact that they're 8.5 feet now. Well, that was not quite high enough at that time. We were told they actually should have been, 9 or 9.5 feet.
Yeah, they came at the new map came out just as they were doing that. I
Yeah,
believe. Yeah.
And so we queried that and we said, well, why don't we do it the correct height? Well, we'll just do this and then we'll do it later on. So that is with reference to 10.5 feet, certainly at least, but perhaps more, who knows? Then I also want to say that, as you know, we dodged Superstorm Sandy. We were supposed to get it. God knows what would have happened to this town if we had gotten it instead of New York City. And I remember at the time, and Gail, you were probably there, there was a tour, I think, with Drew Hayes, the engineer, going along the Strand and the Battery, and discussing various ways to combat river rise and climate change. So what I'm saying is, yes, we need the berm and the dikes, but there are other things. I remember something that was very interesting in New York City. They were considering putting in oyster beds because that has the power to lower the water level. As you know, we've had those sort of little.
That's what you're talking about, the primary
web-
prevention, right? Yeah.
Little.
Yeah,
Not the oyster
I
beds, but
didn't know they could lower the water level. I know they filter the water and clean it.
No, but they also apparently do lower it. So what I'm saying is that coastal engineers, especially after Superstorm Sandy, really started thinking of all sorts of innovative ways to work and to combine things, have a sort of hybrid. So anyway, and then my last comment is simply that the state did, I think it may have been Ordinance 509, request that we not authorize building in areas where not actually wetlands, but areas that were contiguous to wetlands. And the city, for some reason, has just ignored it. The state, I remember John Lloyd, who's very knowledgeable, said, he was sorry that the state didn't require it. The state only requested, and we did pass an ordinance to that effect. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Darcy. So do we know what what our next meeting is gonna be about? Do we wanna start doing some research on the funding? I mean, I could,
I think so.
yeah. Does anybody want to, let's see, where was that list that we just had? Here it is. I'll tell you what,
I have Dave's list from the first meeting.
well, these aren't all funding. These are other things too. But you want to, where was this one that was the resources, funding resilient communities? I know, I'm so taken by the, by the criticism now, but anyway,
Let it go.
but anyway, so how should we divide this up, do you think? I mean, does everybody want to do it, or do you want to, maybe it's a lot for you to do, Tim, because you've got so many other things to do, but, and, you know.
Hey, I sort of want here to help, so
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it is that, you
Right.
guys want me to help out with,
right,
Um,
okay, good.
I think we should divide and conquer.
I'm all about
Yeah.
it.
I mean,
Fine,
you know,
right,
why-
rather-
Why
right.
have us all try to?
No, that's
look
what I
at
was trying to see,
everything?
how we can divide it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah,
There is the database for funding resilient communities at the University of Delaware. Why don't I go there? And I'll see what the various things are, and then I'll email you all with the suggestions.
If you want to give assignments,
That's what I mean, I'll
oh,
assign,
okay, all
I'll
right, that's
assign
fine.
people to look at certain
Okay.
things. Just go looking at this and also the list that,
And this is
we had.
avenues of funding.
Yes, right, yeah,
Yep.
okay,
And that's for engineering to help cover the engineering costs.
right. So I
That
think
kind of
David is
stuff,
saying
right?
that the engineering costs can be sort of enveloped in the funding request, right? Yeah,
Well, again, we're multiple sources, but in a
Right.
general sense, you should be able to.
I can look
Yeah,
at
design
like,
and
the
construction
rescue act
oh, okay,
funding and
great,
state funding, that kind of stuff.
great,
Specific
okay.
costs.
All right, is everybody ready
So,
to?
so the
get
only
this-
thing
Yeah.
only thing that I will say, I do agree with Tom in reference to, like an outline, kind of like a council meeting that there was an outline. I do think we should probably move up just out of respect. A lot of citizens go to a lot of, per their choice, go to a lot of meetings to try to stay up with what's happening and whatnot. So I do think that we should at some point find like a happy medium time frame for public comments.
Yeah,
you
I
know,
agree with
And
that,
that way,
yeah,
we can just,
right, I agree with
if
you.
they
And that,
haven't
I,
heard what we're saying, how do they comment?
Yeah, but I don't, I would. And.
can
that's
we adjourn the
correct.
meeting first before we discuss this part of it? So can we?
Uh,
I don't know if we can.
No,
I don't know, I think it's relevant to the
okay,
yeah.
agenda.
All right.
I would
Wanna-
suggest, that there's a time limit on comments, especially if you do it at the beginning, you're limited, if individuals are speaking on their individual behalf, you limit it to 3 minutes, if they're representing a group.
is it awful to say, make it relevant? Because everybody has their own idea.
I think
guess.
Kevin's got the red,
Yeah.
do the time limit, and
Do
if
the
it's 2
time
minutes and
limit.
55 seconds, say, look, we'll give
On
you
the other
another 30
hand,
seconds.
I have
but
seen
you gotta-
Tom say, I'm not stopping just because of a time limit. I've seen him do that at council meetings, but
You don't really have the power of the gavel here,
No.
so you're in a tough spot, but.
yeah.
But there were comments like Nancy
Oh,
wanted
absolutely.
to talk
Yeah.
about where she lives and that she's flooding and,
Oh, I
Right.
totally understand public
Yeah, and
concept,
that
absolutely.
didn't necessarily have to wait.
right,
Yeah,
to the
so,
very
I mean,
end.
Tim's
And
right,
hear
you
all
gotta
the
move it up.
discussion
Right,
about the
so-
dike heights and, yeah.
But somebody could come in and comment on things that we talked about tonight, next week, but they weren't here, so it's a fine balance.
Well, you could also say, if there's somebody from the public here at the end of the meeting, would you like 3 minutes to comment?
I
And
don't think it's asking too much to ask for public comments at the end of the meeting, is it?
Actually, doesn't city council, they do it both ways, that if it's,
Yes,
if it's on an
If it's
agenda
about
item, it's
agenda item up
early, if
front
it's
and then
anything-
at any comments at the end, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
but I'm
right.
about-
maybe there's consistency there and that,
I think keeping it to like along an agenda type thing that's similar to council meeting. There's no like deviate, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, like we're following an outline based upon, based off of council, which everybody's well versed to council meetings and all.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
that's the only thing. I
Okay.
just, and that way.
well, so why don't we do this, that at the next meeting, our agenda will include public comments about items to be discussed. And then also at the end of public comments of anything having to do with sea level rise or something. I don't
Yeah,
want,
and-
we don't need to have comments about things that are totally irrelevant.
Right, now, and I
Um,
think just following, from the city, roll call in the beginning, who's all here, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then, reviewing, or approving
Minutes,
the last minutes. And then, from that, maybe have a public comment aspect of it.
that's not a bad
and
idea
get
because
Get it out early, because maybe what's
yeah.
commented, it might end up coming up in that.
Because
in
Nancy's
that
comments
meeting
about,
as well.
looking at the inside flooding
Mhm.
would have been good to have at the beginning too, I agree with that. So,
That
yeah,
makes sense. Do we want to set a date?
for the meeting?
Or do we
It's the-
have one?
It's the third Tuesday of June. What is that? It's gonna be June next month,
And
right?
I'll reach out to, it may even be on the city site, website, but, reach out to
21st.
what we have in place in reference to deal with the flooding with houses and that kind of stuff.
That'd be great.
That way it's present. we
Yeah,
can- You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
eyes are on it
right.
and that kind of stuff.
Because
So
that
I'll
is
get
a
that.
drainage situation, and I think that's maybe, if we have to address that, that's a whole really huge subject, right? I mean, with
And-
drainage and,
And I'm sure, I don't know what Jeff's schedule's like, but he might be able to come at the next
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
Maybe that could be old business, like an old business topic.
yeah,
And he can explain how the cleaning of the drainage works, and,
Right.
we can,
That's a good idea.
he can touch on that.
Uh-huh.
Since it all ties, water's flowing, so.
yeah,
since it
because we should,
all kind of
Right.
ties in, and one's gonna relate to the other.
we should be addressing people's concerns, right? Because,
So-
I know there are a lot of people like that. Is there any, should we be inviting, are you going to be able to be here? to-
Yeah, I'm
to
fine.
talk about
I
the,
was gonna say, I will not be here the third Tuesday in July, though.
Okay.
But yeah, Bill
Okay.
knows I'm coming, and,
Okay,
he's fine.
and
with
maybe,
it, so.
do you think you might have those updated numbers by then or not?
No,
No, okay, all right. Okay, and is there someone, say, from DenRec or coastal programs or somebody like that, that maybe we should get in front of us at some point? Do you have names?
it's interesting. I am doing a project. We just wrapped it up with the coastal programs, and in a conference call, their director, got restored, took a different job, and so now they have an interim. And I mentioned it to her, what was going on in Newcastle, so
Mhm.
they're, kind of get it on their radar screen. I mean, I could reach out to the coastal programs and see if anybody, but they may want a bit more focus, if you will, who,
Right.
I don't know if a director is gonna want to come, quite honestly, and, now if we're on more of a staff level, again, Kevin, you might know Dan right better than
Yeah.
I.
Right.
Not anymore.
Yeah,
I know it's been a few
we're trying to get
years,
our
but
arms around
I know it's
things.
all new, a lot of new players, but, I think it's sooner or later you do want to engage them, whether
Yeah,
now is the
All right.
time, or maybe
so maybe
another
we'll
few
have a,
meetings down the pike.
next week, next month, maybe we'll discuss what
Outside
specific things we would
resources.
need upon.
Outside resources.
Yes,
and-
and
That's probably a pretty
what
good
kind of
idea.
things we would want them to address when
Yeah.
they got here.
Um,
Yeah.
So real quick also, since they're doing the title gate, at Ormy Creek, I don't know, maybe, do we want to have, since that kind of like ties into this, do we want to have somebody talk about that and that operation?
You mean what happened
And
there?
it's, now, just the operation of that title gate itself. Since they're
Oh.
in the construction stage of it, and it's pretty significant. And all, so.
Who's constructing it?
It's.
LDOT
it's-
maintains-
it's under
LDOT?
this- it's under
LDOT
this-
maintains the time gates. Okay, and,
But Jeff's very familiar with that too. I believe.
He suggested we might get somebody from DelDOT. When I did the tour, he suggested that we might get somebody from DelDOT at some point. Now, I don't know who that somebody is, but Jeff might know.
Yeah, and somebody maybe who could address things like the Route 9 problem there, at the, when it comes
Well,
into.
and that's a safety issue too, because it's evacuation. It's one of our
Exactly.
ways to evacuate.
It's on the
city.
schedule to get funded. It's just some years out
I
and
think it's
a couple,
2026.
a
What is
couple
it actually
council
gonna-
people met with Senator Poor
Right.
and others.
That's
and
actually Route 9 on, beyond Dobbinsville.
Dobbinsville.
I'm
Oh, you're talking
Route
about,
9
okay.
coming, we're going across Broad Dike there, that, both of them are Route 9, both evacuation routes that both have a problem.
Right.
But yeah, anyway. Okay, are we set? Are we know what we're doing?
well, and I just, Tim, I have, Yeah, and I only made one copy, not 10, but, this is the geotech review for for the dikes projects. There's the preliminary design, and these are the engineering plans for Broad Marsh, Gambacorta, and Army Creek dikes.
Oh,
Okay, and, and this is the historical work, it cost 125 grand, 12 years ago, 10 years ago.
mhm.
Yeah.
What would that be
and then,
now?
To do anything, around the Strand, at the Strand will require, especially if there's federal dollars involved, will require, an archaeological review. And so, just, when you
An
get.
archaeological review.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because of just the historic nature of the Strand. So,
And who did that?
John Milner Associates. So I don't have the final copy that I can find it, but I have the draft final for Broad Marsh, and then I have the archaeological survey for Army Creek, Buttonwood, Gambacorta.
Is that online by any chance? No.
They are not.
Kathy?
Kim will be here later on if you can read those and she can make copies for everybody.
Oh,
They're big files. That's, but yeah, these are for
thank
you.
very much.
And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
they're detailed and
And Kevin, what role did the conservation district play in the dikes?
we got the funding from Denrec. Okay, so we got the $6 or $7 million and we managed the whole project. So we hired, we did a review of qualifications and selected the engineering team. We hired the archaeological firm. We advertised the projects, we supervised construction and deemed them complete.
So what's the conservation district's brief kind of? What is your role in?
Well, we are, tasked with flood protection, drainage improvement, water quality. What makes us unique, Alice, is we can work on private property.
I looked on my property.
So,
And we're literally the only government agency that can do that. DelDOT can work on their road and their right of way. The county can work on their sewer easements and drainage easements.
so you're the man to talk to about 4th Street, right?
Potentially,
Yeah,
but we have to have funding.
right.
We get
Right.
projects.
You don't have money of
specific
your
fund-
own. You have to get funding.
Yeah, we get funding to do projects,
Right, okay.
okay?
Well, that's very good to know then.
And, so that's what we do. And right now, we doing like 60 or 70, small, to medium, to large size drainage projects.
Have you ever done anything like this in another town where you've addressed funding, flooding on a street? Or, yeah, you have. That's great. Okay, well, that's really helpful.
But what is the consensus of the other areas? Now, grant you, they all have their own unique, different issues. But is there like a generic solution that people?
Typically not, there are site-specific problems, there are site-specific solutions, Tim.
I just wasn't sure if you found construction going one way versus like another way, that's all.
Not sure.
So like a berm versus seawalls versus that type of stuff to help, keep the water out.
Yeah.
So,
This dike project, was the biggest project we've ever done. And we, literally within a year of doing that, folks down at Fort Penn were like, hey, Donnelly, why don't you rebuild our dike? I was like, well, I didn't get funding to redo your dike, and their dike is now 70 years old. And again, it was, originally designed and constructed by DelDOT, and now Fish and Wildlife owns, both ends, and a private owner owns the middle. That's a couple of 100 feet offshore, so it's. Anyway, but, and as I think we talked about at the last meeting, the end of it, there's not high land to tie into, so you literally have to build a structure across Route 9. And, it would be like a gated, gated road. So it's, those.
We
are-
have kind of a gated road on Route 9.
Yeah.
This is a big sign to say road closed.
Yeah, oh, I know.
And they're there all the time.
Yeah, great. People now just run around them because they're used to them.
At one point, we were thinking, that's just when I first came to the district in like 2008, we'll raise Route 9 by Army Street Dike for Delta. And they were like, you don't have enough money. It's a hugely expensive project to do that.
Well, they say they're gonna do it, but,
Yeah.
it keeps getting pushed back.
Right.
More and more and more.
Right.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they're supposed to raise it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting on either side, what happens, and then how they. can
Wow,
raise it.
yeah, and then you got Dobbins.
Yeah,
Right.
That's the transition.
yeah,
from Dobbins.
we'll just go like this.
And you got that new, relatively new residential community on the west side of the road,
Yeah.
whatever it's called.
Anyway.
River something.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I guess we're adjourned. Thank you, all everybody.
All right, I'm gonna leave these here.
Thank you.
I can try sending you the file.
Freezing. Halfway through, I'm thinking, I need to bring a sweatshirt next time.
It was like that. at
It's
the
chilly in here.
Okay.
Last, too. It was freezing in there.
At least I have a
I
sweatshirt.
had a sweater on because I remember last time I was in there. it was
Man, it's cold in here. Oh. I think
Trying to get it.
Yeah.
You've got
Probably.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds good.